Hello, good day. My name is Chris Higgins and I work with the City of Vancouver. I'm a green building planner and I'm here to talk to you about Vancouver's transition off of fossil fuels and how we've used Passive House to greatly accelerate that. In the background of this photo, you'll see our downtown peninsula, sort of dense urban core. But Vancouver, most of our landmass is in single family housing, and I'll touch on that briefly. We've looked at a number of different standards and found Passive House to be the best standard to greatly accelerate our transition off of fossil fuels. And I'm going to share with you how we're trying to do that and how we're succeeding. This is another shot of Vancouver. So this is the downtown core, largely covered in clouds. And as a city that it does get cloudy, Passive House is an ideal standard because it greatly reduces energy use in buildings, and heating and hot water energy demand in new buildings is the largest piece of the sort of energy and carbon pie in terms of operating carbon. So it's ideally suited, the Passive House standard, given that our goal is transitioning off of fossil fuels and greatly reducing energy in order to do that. Because in Vancouver, low carbon energy tends to be more expensive than high carbon energy. So in order to make the transition in a just way and an affordable way, you need to greatly reduce the amount of energy that you are using. So a little bit about Vancouver. Vancouver is about 600,000 people and about 2.5 million people in the region. So perhaps similar to Adelaide in terms of size, and we may be a little bit smaller, but I think we have some very similar challenges. Our larger metro area is not regulated by the City of Vancouver, who I work for. The area in white that looks sort of like a thumbs up, that's the City of Vancouver, and we are the sort of more dense urban core of the region. This is a land use map, just highlighting all the single-family homes, all the blocks that have single-family homes on them. The pink and green is just an economic piece. Homes that are in pink are over $1 million is their assessed value, and homes in green are under $1 million in assessed value. What I'm trying to highlight with this is that we have a lot of 1- and 2-family homes. And it's only been in the last couple of years that we've allowed duplexes. Historically, there was a lot of single-family homes. That was all that was allowed. Passive House as a standard, incredibly well suited to single-family, duplex, and low-rise residential, which makes up the overwhelming majority of what Vancouver sees. We'll see some other building types, but just wanted to highlight that. This is another way of putting it in terms of total square footage. In terms of percentage, the square footage we build on an annual basis, it's somewhere in the 60s, 64, 65% of what we build annually. Being low rise, being single family, laneways, duplexes, row houses, and low rise multifamily, like a 3-story building. One more last perspective on the city. If we're looking from our southern edge towards downtown, you can see the sort of landmass of a lot of single family homes mixed in with some denser forms of development, and then at the very bottom of this slide, some industrial uses as well. In terms of greenhouse gas footprint and sort of why focus on buildings, buildings make up 58% of Vancouver's annual greenhouse gas footprint. So it's a logical place to start, followed by vehicles at 38%, and then methane produced at our landfill at 4%. So buildings really clear place to start. This presentation is just about 40 minutes, so I won't have time to go into some of the high-level policies like the Greenest City Action Plan, the Renewable City Strategy, or the Zero Emissions Plan, but they are all available online, and I've included my email at the end of this presentation. So if you'd like to learn more, have a look on our website, or I'm happy to connect you with them or have a call with the person responsible for any of these strategies. The Greenest City Strategy was a city effort about a decade ago to try and be the greenest city in the world. And I would say we in earnest started on buildings at about that time, but saw very modest progress initially. The Renewable City Strategy, that's a more recent document, started in 2015, and that's the strategy for transitioning off of fossil fuels in the city of Vancouver, primarily for buildings and transportation. And then there's the Zero Emissions Building Plan, which zeroes in on new construction and primarily new residential, but new construction generally. Vancouver recently declared a climate emergency, and that requires all new buildings to emit zero carbon in their operations by 2025. existing buildings have a future goal of 2050. So this is sort of the broader council support and the clear marching orders for staff. A passive house is highlighted in the zero emissions building plan. When I looked at the city strategy that had been developed prior to my joining the city on how we were going to transition to zero emissions, it was very similar to passive house. Reduce energy use first, which passive house of course does. Increase the use of renewable energy, which passive house does with the primary energy renewable requirement. And then lastly, increase the supply of renewable energy broadly. So seeing that and how well it aligned with passive house and the need to transform how we build in Vancouver, passive house was a clear winner as an approach to transition and help Vancouver transition off of fossil fuels. So I thought before I talk about the policies that we've implemented and the barriers we removed and changes we put into place, I talk a little bit about where Vancouver was, where we were, and where we are now. And I'll highlight also that I've presented to a few different cities, a number of which have taken us up on our offer to share the policies that we have created. And so if there's a city or community in Australia that's interested in our policies and perhaps borrowing some of our policies and using them, we would be thrilled to have conversations with your municipalities. And we can set up meetings with individuals, for instance, our head of inspections or our city councilor or our head of planning or development services. So peers can talk to peers. We found that to be most useful. Or if there's a buildings planner that wants to talk to me, I'm certainly happy to chat as well, of course. So let's talk about where the city was in 2014. In 2014, I joined the city and there was just one single passive house under construction, one single home that was under construction. And when talking to a number of builders and designers, there was interest in passive house, but there was presently no real support of any kind to build passive house. So there was additional cost and risk, but the city wasn't doing anything to try and encourage the construction of passive homes. Since that time, we've spent 6 years putting into place policies and also removing barriers to encourage passive house. And so we've gone from one home in 2014 to 364 homes in 2020 that are under construction. So that's pretty great. Pictured as a multi-family building, built a passive house. This project is called The Heights. It was the first multi-family, sort of more than 5 home dwelling that was completed. And now there's a number of multi-family projects completed. But yeah, 364 under construction, so that's pretty good. If we look at those that are in for permit, 4,713 in for permit. It's pretty incredible to me, the how quickly that can change. Vancouver's permitting processes, I would say, are a little long, maybe in duration. I don't know how it is in Australia. A very simple home for building permit might be between 6 and 12 months, but for a large building like this, the rezoning process, the development permit process, and the building permit process could easily be 3 to 5 years. So that sort of highlights why there's so many in the permitting process. Aside from this tremendous success that we've seen and this uptake in passive house development, I just wanted to highlight this one in particular, which has just recently completed its rezoning process. The developers, invested millions of dollars in getting the project to this point. It's a 170 meter tall passive house, so it'll be the tallest in the world. The present tallest is 88 meters. Why this is exciting for me and for the city of Vancouver is the transformation in the supply chain, in the trades, in the design community that will happen as a result of this project. Because it'll need trades, it'll need ventilation, it'll need windows, all those products that'll need to be supplied. When it was announced, there was inquiries from around the world in terms of supplying products for this high rise. Pictured is Rick Gregory. He's a vice president from Henson Developments, and he was interviewed recently, and I got a chance to read the interview. And he was asked, why passive house? Like, why pursue this additional risk? And with a slight pause, he said, "You can make any building you want. I could make any building I want, but the planet is on fire." And then he drew attention to passive house as a solution. And he said, "You're either part of the solution or part of the problem. And up to now, I've been part of the problem. I drive a car every day. I heat my home with natural gas. And I want to do something substantial to address the problem we're facing. I don't want to sound preachy, but you asked me to give the reason. And that's what's really in my mind and what's driving it from a perspective of the company." And that's tremendous. This is sort of ideal scenario. As a city, the policies that I'm going to talk about, we've put in place so developers can do it and make as much, or perhaps even come out a little better for having done a passive house compared to a code minimum worst building they can legally build. That's my job. As a city staff, my job is to ensure that someone can build a passive house, and financially they'll come out as good, if not better, than if they were to build the code minimum sort of worst building they could build. Another job, of course, is improving the minimum code. So even the worst building is not so bad, but that's a story for another presentation. In terms of passive house, as a city, we have a goal of constructing a passive house as easy and as profitable as building a code minimum building. And we've been working on that for the past 6 years, and we'll continue to work on that until we get there. So last slide before I transition to talking about the sort of 3 big steps we've taken, the sort of macro steps, and then some of the details. I don't know how it is in Australia, but in Vancouver and in Canada, Vancouver, some of our councillors are interested in better buildings, but all of our councillors are interested in growing the green economy. So one thing that I've done every time I present to council, and the same for my peers, we have a local manufacturer, we have a local builder that speaks to council about why these regulations will help, or why these relaxations will help, or why these incentives or barrier removals will help. In 2014, we had 0 passive house window manufacturers. There was 1 company that was bringing in window frames and then assembling them locally, which was great. But now we have 6 window manufacturers that are manufacturing passive house windows locally, which is incredible. So now you have choice of PVC, aluminum, wood, fiberglass. So we have many different options for developers, and it's been tremendously helpful in the transition for projects to have local options. And it's been tremendously powerful for council to hear that the changes that they're making don't just result in better buildings, they result in a better economy, a better local economy. So without further ado, I'll talk about the 3 sort of macro steps that we took as a city, and we shared with others and would like to see others take. Because setting the goal of the greenest city in the world, we fail at that goal if we are the only city to make that transition. So first, we set a clear and compelling destination and a clear path. Then we found leaders, we fed the leaders, and then we followed them. And then finally, we built industry and government capacity. So I'll start by talking about how we set the clear and compelling destination and path, and how passive house fit into that. Certainly, every presentation that I gave, I pointed to passive house as a potential end goal, and something to strive for, and something that we would put in place incentives and easements and relaxations for projects to pursue. In setting a path, we set greenhouse gas limits and heat loss limits in the building code. So Vancouver has its own building code. So we set those heat loss limits in there. We put the envelope and ventilation systems first, so ensuring they were the first thing that's addressed. So you're not trying to do it all with mechanicals, because we had a history where mechanicals had promised great things and perhaps not delivered. And that was one of the things that really appealed to Passive House, is you get this better envelope, and then it lowers the burden on mechanicals. So we really pointed towards Passive House and indicated that that was the direction we're heading. So one of the questions that came up initially when we started to point to Passive House was like, why Passive House? Why not X or Y or Z or these other standards? Why not come up with something that's made in Canada, a Canadian specific standard? And one of the reasons we pointed to Passive House was really excellence in envelope and ventilation. A second piece was there's a lot of research and quality control and decades of research behind the Passive House standard, which was very helpful. And envelopes certainly are forever, or almost forever. They last a long time, usually the life of the building, certainly longer than 50 years. And ventilation systems last a long time. And when they do have to be replaced, it's a fairly non-intrusive process. It really resonated with designers and builders when we talked about Passive House and pursuing that as a standard. And there was a turnkey training and network of practitioners that was really appealing, that we could tap into that training. In communicating with industry, I know I spoke every year at the local fenestration conference. So that's our local window and door manufacturers, and talking about the direction the city's heading and how this year we have 0, this year we have 1, this year we have 3 local manufacturers that produce Passive House window frames, and framing the scope of the business opportunity as well. And that's why I think so many local window manufacturers got on board. We set a 100% renewable goal and really communicated that widely. And we formed a steering committee from industry that could give guidance to the city, picking different progressive firms that could give city direction on how to implement Passive House and how to make building Passive House easier. We were also providing certified Passive House trades education. So we provide a 50% trades subsidy if you have a tradesperson who wants to take the training. I think it's a 5-day training, results in an exam that you take. And we have 4 inspectors now that are trades certified. So if you're a Passive House project, you get a Passive House trades certified inspector. And in every case we can, you get to work with a planner who he or she has training on a Passive House. And so myself, I'm a certified Passive House individual, and I have worked with many of the projects. Now there's also 2 other staff that work with many of the incoming projects. I work kind of as a fixer or problem solver if there's a challenge with a Passive House project that they're running into. So once we've set the path, and so people really clearly understand that we're heading to this low carbon future, where buildings are more airtight, walls are thicker, and better windows are installed, and we're caring a lot more about the building envelope and its completion, we then wanted to find leaders, feed them, and then follow what they're doing and learn from what they're doing. So one of the early pieces was we talked to a variety of professionals, of leaders in the design community, in the construction community, the development community, and found that they really had a passion that they really wanted to share, and that there were professionals that really wanted to design and build quality. It's just the systems that we have in place weren't necessarily delivering on that desire. And so we looked at how we could change the system so we were getting better designs and better build quality systems that rewarded that. And we had a meaningful personal collaboration with a number of different developers and builders. Some of it was as simple as providing space within City Hall after hours for designers and builders to meet and learn about Passive House in an informal setting, and different builders or designers would present, and this is my project, these are the challenges we've run into, these are the successes that we had. So peers could learn in sort of a low competition, I guess, environment. And that worked incredibly well. We did that for a couple of years here in the basement of City Hall. One of the kind of feed pieces was listening to professionals in the industry and understanding what the barriers were. And we focused the first 18 months, certainly, if not longer, on just removing barriers, removing issues, removing regulation that was causing problems. And then after that, then there was political appetite to consider incentives that I'll touch on. So one of the early incentives was nearzero.ca, which you can visit the website. And we provided $20,000, most of it up front, for detached passive house case studies. This was all for single family, duplexes, townhouses, and low rise, 3-story maximum multifamily. You could get up to $20,000 for a case study. So that was quite helpful early piece we could deploy. But it did cost some money, and we had to cap it at, I think, 38 or 40 dwellings participating. Something that doesn't cost money out of the city's pocket is floor area bonuses or increases. So we have a 5 to 18% floor area bonus or increase for passive house developments. So if you're a multifamily developer, for instance, you can get a 5% floor area bonus for building to passive house. If you're building a duplex, you can get an 18% floor area bonus. If you're building a single family, you can get a 15% floor area bonus. Across the board, these work out to 4 to 5% bonuses in terms of additional livable space, because some of the additional floor area that we're providing is taken up with thicker walls and ventilation systems. But you're getting bonus floor area that's obviously worth quite a lot to the developer, the builder, or the homeowner. We also provided early assistance with staff. So a developer would reach out to me and say, we're interested to build a passive house. This is the site we're doing due diligence on. Can we have some early conversations with the city? The typical wait time to have those conversations in the city are 4 to 12 weeks. But in buying property, the timelines are often much shorter. So we're able to sort of bypass that waiting and get an answer in just a couple of days. So that allowed a project to acquire a piece of land, which they're now building over 100 passive homes on. So that was one of the early kind of feed pieces. So the density bonus as a big piece, incentive as a big piece, and staff that are there to help you on your sort of passive house journey was also quite significant. Another piece was removing regulations that were getting in the way for projects pursuing passive house. So one example is, you can see on the right-hand side of the screen, Vancouver sometimes prescribes balconies on the sides of buildings. With passive house, we're allowing balconies on the top of buildings as well, which can reduce potential construction costs because of reducing thermal bridging by, instead of having many small balconies, having either many small balconies on the roof or a number of larger shared balconies on the roof. We also are allowing buildings to have simplified forms. As you'll see in the middle of the screen, there's a T-shaped building. We're allowing it to be rectangular if it's pursuing passive house. And on the left-hand side of the screen, we're allowing buildings to just be a little bit bigger. We've relaxed some floor space, height, and setback limits, as well as provided flexibility on frontage shape and balcony requirements. So really a simplification, and then also a publication of here are the approaches that are alternatives that are acceptable if you're pursuing passive house. So that was quite helpful for developers in the development community, and gave clear flexibility and advice to the design community, so they could understand what they could do if pursuing passive house, what additional opportunities there were. The last piece was building industry and government capacity. Pretty key, but I have given 10 to 15 presentations to staff, either on their weekly team meeting or voluntarily lunch and learns, and that built initial interest and let staff know if they wanted to pursue a day-long education or a multi-day passive house education course, the city would cover that cost. And as a result, we now have staff throughout the city that have passive house training and an understanding of what developers and architects are trying to do when they come with a passive house project, so they don't get blank stares or they don't get an answer that's not helpful. So we trained over 100 city staff. It's very close to 200 at this point on the Passive House 1 day. We have 4 trades-trained inspectors, 2 that are assigned routinely to passive house projects, and then 2 backups. We've supported staff in getting their CPHC, like myself, and there's half a dozen others. All new facilities are being built to passive house. This is Fire Hall 17. You can see 1, 2, 3, 4 drive-through bays there. So obviously a challenging building to build a passive house, but it's the next building we're going to build, so it's pursuing passive house. And we're aiming for staff on any project in the city of Vancouver to be passive house trained. This is just an updated photo. I was by the Fire Hall 17 the other day. It's not only a fire hall, but it is also going to be a small data center, a satellite data center for the city. This fire hall is in the southeast quadrant of the city. In addition to being a data center, it's also going to be a specialized laundry for all of the other fire halls in the city. The fire garments are all laundered in a fire retardant solution, and so it has many varied and unique energy uses, and then also opportunities. So we're harvesting the waste heat from the server rooms to heat the domestic hot water for the fire hall. So there's some unique opportunities that came up as a result. But I would say fire hall is one of the more challenging buildings to do, with those 4 drive-through bays. Getting to meet passive house standards is quite challenging, but PHI in Darmstadt, Germany has been phenomenal to work with in certifying this project. In the back of this slide, you see 2 renderings of daycares. So these are daycares that are being put on existing parking structures. The city was doing an analysis of parking, and the top floor in Vancouver tends to be the least popular to park on because you have to drive the furthest to get out and in, and it's not covered. So on a rainy day, you're paying the same amount to park as you would on a lower level, but you're getting wet when you're walking. So we weren't getting a lot of revenue from them, and at the same time, we needed to locate these daycares in the downtown core where there was a great need, and we didn't have a lot of success identifying opportunities until we came across these parking structures and found that the city would actually get greater revenue sort of renting the space to a daycare. So these are 2 passive house daycares, the modular construction and largely offsite fabricated, and both pursuing passive house. You're looking for a first building to do as passive house as a municipality, and you build daycares. Daycares are really straightforward one, sort of the opposite of the fire hall. This particular set of daycares is quite near a helicopter landing pad, a private helicopter landing pad in downtown Vancouver. And one of the great things about passive house is the indoor comfort acoustically. So it's very, very quiet indoor. And also with the MERV 13 filtration, the high level of filtration, you get really good quality indoor air, despite there may be a lot of combustion sources nearby. So pretty ideally suited for passive house, and we're now looking at our sort of 3rd, 4th, and 5th project to pursue in terms of city buildings as passive house. So that takes us through some of the steps that the city of Vancouver has taken to pursue passive house. And not everything we've done has worked tremendously well, but I presented a number of the solutions that have worked well and I've seen a lot of uptake. If I were to pull out just one piece, I would say the removal of barriers really signaled to the industry that we were serious about encouraging passive house. And then once the barriers were out of the way, then layering on the incentives, the floor space incentives, really set interest alight. There was a lot of interest following those incentives being made available, and that's sort of a clear indication that the city was serious and not just sort of talking about why it would be good to be a green city. I'll talk very briefly about 2 pieces of climate change related art in this slide. One is, should I be worried? Talking about this sort of unknown future. And it's right on the waterfront. A little hard to see, but if you look in the center of the screen, the lower part on the bottoms of the bridge supports, there's gradiated color bands of blue, and the top band is where our king tide, or sort of highest tide of the year, will be in 2100 if climate change continues unabated. So essentially the area that I was standing taking this photo would be underwater. So there have been two popular pieces of art sort of talking about climate change. This is a multifamily building that I mentioned earlier. It was the first multifamily building with over 3 dwellings that was completed. The design team that did this building now has a half a dozen passive house multifamily buildings for various different clients that are in for permitting or under construction somewhere throughout the city. And one particular developer was so inspired by the pursuit of passive house and the incentives that the city was offering and the barriers that we were removing and the assistance staff were providing, that now they're doing their second and their third project ever in the city, all to the passive house standard. This is a project downtown in Chinatown. It was pursuing passive house. It actually missed passive house, and that's a question that comes up a lot. What if our developer misses passive house? Then what do they do? Is the city going to pull back the incentives? No, we don't. If the project is pursuing passive house in good faith and is built as designed, as was this one, they missed ever so slightly their primary energy, so 127 kilowatt hours per meter squared, and they're at 0.72 ACH. Still a great all-electric building. Missed their passive house certification, but still considered a success. This is the building, a recent photo of the building completed. The building also has a very simplified rectangular form, which not all buildings in Vancouver get to have that form. We often push buildings to have more complex forms, I would say. So that was a real success, getting this building to be allowed to have a simplified form. And I think this is maybe 70 dwellings, something like that. And they have a large rooftop deck. It's the first certified passive house single family home in the city of Vancouver. There are now many certified passive house single family homes, but this was the first. This is a rendering of the project that's now just completed and people are just moving in. This was the first developer that did a multifamily project that is now the same developer doing the second and third project to passive house. And now there are a number of developers doing their second or later passive house, but this was the very first one. So another passive house single family. I just like this photo because Vancouver doesn't really get any snow, and I grew up somewhere where there was a lot of snow in Newfoundland, a small island in the Atlantic Ocean, and it's quite a bit colder there. And I really gravitate this photo because there's a little bit of snow on the ground, which is very rare for Vancouver. But this is a passive house project. This was the builder's first passive house project, and that builder, he is now on his third or fourth passive house. He doesn't do all passive house, but he offers passive house to all of his clients as an option. This is the tower I talked about a little bit earlier by Henson Developments, and 485 homes. There's 113 of those are social housing, and 49 are market rental, the remainder being condo or ownership. This is an art gallery. It's a Vancouver art gallery. The building was announced in 2019, and they've said that they're pursuing passive house and using that as a fundraising lever, which is phenomenal. I won't go into it because I'm preaching to the converted, but passive house is a great building for art in terms of thermally. You get very even heating and cooling. When you change from the seasons, you get an incredibly constant temperature. There's not great variation throughout the year or throughout the building. So what's next for Vancouver? Well, we're considering passive house within base zoning. We're also encouraging and looking at how we can encourage retrofit with Passive House. We've had a couple of projects that have pursued retrofit with Passive House. We're considering embodied energy in our policy and looking at embodied energy. As a city, we now have the direction from council that by 2025, all new buildings need to be 100% renewable in terms of heating and hot water, so no natural gas for heating or hot water by 2025 in our building code. And so to achieve that, we're greatly improving the building code, referencing Passive House with thicker walls, better windows, moving to triple glazed windows, greatly improved air tightness. It's not quite to the Passive House level, but it's possible because we've referenced Passive House. People see what's possible, and many different builders and design teams have demonstrated what's possible. The last piece is just sharing what we've learned with others. If we, as a city, are the only one that pursues this, we fail. We really need broad use of Passive House. So there's many different places in the world that are transitioning off of fossil fuels and doing it in a just way. I wanted to share the email address of my coworkers as well as myself. If you have any questions about Passive House education, Andrea Wickham is a great person to email. Andrea Wickham at Vancouver.ca. If you have questions about zoning bonus density or floor space exclusion, Shylin Black, Mr. Shylin Black is a great person to follow up with. Bonus points if when you email him, and eventually if you have a call with him, you pronounce it Shylin as opposed to Salin, as he often gets. Or myself, you can email me at chris.higgins@vancouver.ca. I check my email often, but I check my Twitter even more often when I'm off work. So please find me there at CA Higgins. Thanks very much for the time to present today, and I'm happy to take some questions if there are any questions.